Hello, my name is Edward Abelar. And my name is Paolo Abelar. In this presentation, we'll be discussing Buddhism and healthcare. Okay, unfortunately, the monitor can be seen from the camera for some reason, so I do urge you for watching this video, and if you actually want to learn, to follow the link I believe in the discussion board where I'll be posting this video to follow along with this presentation. And we'll get started. Okay, so first, before we delve into the discussion between Buddhism and healthcare, we need to know a couple things about Buddhism first. First among them is the 5 precepts of Buddhism. Now these are rules to live by in Buddhism, not really like the 10 Commandments, but more so of moral or ethical principles. So before we can understand that, I'll go through the 5 lists of the precepts. First, we have no harming of any living thing whatsoever. So no inflicting any type of damage, physical pain or emotional. Then we have the second precept, which is no stealing. Stealing of any kind is not prohibited at all. Basically, stealing any or taking any items that do not belong to you is what would classify as stealing at this point. So for the third one is no adultery. Now this is pretty short, as I'm sure you all know what this means. No adultery means don't cheat. Don't cheat on your partner, that's what it basically is. And for the fourth one, we have no lying or gossiping of any kind. Now lying and gossiping can go hand in hand, but it's basically about spreading false information about anybody else. And for the fifth one, it's no taking any intoxicating substances. Now this doesn't limit just to alcohol, but it can also extend into the world of drugs. The reason this is limited is because Buddhism, which emphasizes a clear mind and mental clarity most of the time, they don't allow any substance such as these because they can impair judgment and can lead to bad karmic situations, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want to deal with. So, like I said before, the 5 precepts of Buddhism, they don't really resemble much to the 10 Commandments. So if you break these, you won't necessarily be condemned to hell, but it's more so as a guideline to help you think better as a Buddhist. So let's say I break the 1 precept of stealing. After I break it, I know I won't be condemned to some eternal cycle, but rather I look on it as some sort of moral or ethical principle. So when I look at it, I think, okay, what situation did I put myself to get into this, and how can I avoid it? Because the end goal for Buddhism, of course, is to reach nirvana, and that's through multiple cycles, right? Now the best way to reach it is reaching spiritual enlightenment, which means having mental clarity and overall being a very good, morally sound Buddhist, if you know what I mean. Okay, so for the second and last part of this introduction, we will be discussing Buddhism's attitudes towards death. Now, if you remember from the beginning weeks of our assignment, we delved into the history of Prince Siddhartha, the last reincarnation of Buddha. And from what we've learned, or what I've learned personally, is that human suffering is basically an inevitable and unavoidable part of life. And Prince Siddhartha figured this out too. Because he was heavily isolated and largely ignorant because of it, because his father heard the prophecy of the Devas before he was born, he went outside and saw the four sights, that being elderly age, suffering, and illness. And the last one being a man that had reached a sort of spiritual enlightenment and had largely removed himself from society. But besides all that, human suffering is an unavoidable part of life. And because death is a part of it, death essentially is a part of it too. Now, a large stigma that surrounds death is that we lose our place in this world and we may no longer ever return. But because in Buddhism, such a thing as reincarnation exists, the cycle of being able to be reborn again into multiple lives until one reaches a certain enlightenment or even nirvana, it serves as a sort of fail-safe or a type of safety net. It's knowing that death isn't the end all be all. It's just merely the end of life in this body as we know it. And of course we know that once one dies, his or hers reincarnation solely depends on a karmic balance, which is basically an accumulation of karma, both good and bad, from intentional actions. And those actions can span from, actual literal intentional actions, thoughts, or even words. And depending on this karmic balance, the nature of a person's reincarnation is not solely, but subject to change depending on what they've accumulated so far. So once again, before we actually get really into the presentation, I figured I'd share you with an outline of what the presentation is going to be about. Obviously, we're going to talk about Buddhism in relation to healthcare, but there's 4 topics in mind that we and my partner have chosen for this video. And that being, the first among them, is Buddhism attitude towards medicine. Now this can span, it's a pretty general thing to be honest, but when talking about Buddhism and medicine, more so of what I had in mind was how Buddhism treats actually taking medicine and also receiving a type of treatment from the doctor. The second one being Buddhism and health. Now, or mental health rather, sorry. Now we know that Buddhism places a heavy emphasis on clarity of the mind, and we figured out this would be a very interesting topic to cover. And the third one, we had Buddhism and diet, and the last topic of the video is going to be Buddhism and abortion. Okay, so the first quarter of this presentation is going to be over Buddhism and medicine. Now, there are 3 primary causes of illnesses in the human body according to Buddhism, those being the 3 physiological poisons. Now, those include ignorance, greed, and anger or anguish. If one were to involve in any one of these physiological poisons, each being separate or all together, he or she is subject to much hazardous things to their health. So you can experience a variety of different physical complications, mental health, and just everything in between. Now, although these illnesses are very bad to the body, they provide a sort of mental strength to the person as well. Now in Buddhism, because we know mental health and mental clarity are very strong characteristics of this religion, this shines a bright light on the otherwise what are bad things in our life. Because what these do is that if one were to acknowledge them, they're able to build a strong sense of self-tolerance and patience. In general, I would say that with medicine, Buddhism is very open to it. Because in Buddhism, the physical body and the mind are interrelated and codependent. Now that they're codependent, if one were to be dysfunctional, they obviously wouldn't be able to function with one another and vice versa. So, medicine is very strongly advised in this religion because they help maintain a sense of balance in the body. And for the person to remain relatively healthy, it's strongly advised for the person to take such medication that has been prescribed by their doctor to maintain a good health or well-being. Yeah. Now, if you remember back to what I believe was the second side of this presentation, we talk about the 5 precepts of Buddhism. And among them was the prohibition of drugs or alcohol. Now, I talked about why such things are prohibited. Because if one were to take those, it impairs the judgment of the mind and can lead one to take some very questionable actions. Now, with medicine, we both know that there are some types of drugs that carry such similar side effects. So, take for example psychedelic drugs that are meant to help ease anxiety or depression. I may be wrong about that one, but I know anxiety for sure. Now, while such can be very, very beneficial to our health or mental health and well-being, they do provide some side effects that do contradict one of the 5 precepts. Now, from my research, both from multiple scholarly articles, research on the internet, and books, I found that there isn't a general consensus in Buddhism when it comes to dealing with drugs that provide such harsh and such harsh side effects. From what I've seen from multiple people giving their opinion, many believe that it's still the person shouldn't necessarily give up the drugs, but use it up to a point until that person can become dependent without them. Because as we know, Buddhism heavily emphasizes is the overall good health and well-being of the person. Now that our medicine topic is generally done, I just wanted to add this little side fact. Now, many may not know this, but Buddha, at a very young age, I couldn't recall what cycle or being he was, but at a very young age, he did find himself very interested into medicine and actually became very well endowed with himself in medicine. He became very knowledgeable about diseases. And in it, there he created the Sutra of Buddha's Diagnosis, and it explained how a doctor should help. It's a 4-step process of how a doctor should help his patients in a very effective way. So the first step was discover the origin of illness, achieve a thorough understanding of the illness, prescribe the appropriate medication, and cure the illness in a matter of a way that it will never ever return again. So we're nearing the halfway point of our presentation. We're on to the second topic, which is Buddhism and mental health. I wanted to start off this topic by a quote I found online by Amaravati Ajahn Amaro, which states, sorry you won't be able to see the screen, but it states that he, in particular Buddha, was concerned with what worked, not with the way things should be, but how they are. Now, I believe I touched on this point previously, I believe in the last slides, to be in particular, is that Buddhism works in a way such that they don't seek to understand why the world is or how it came to be this way. Actually, I don't know about that part, but it's more about understanding and accepting the way the world is. Now, in relation to mental health, they believe that the best way to deal with mental challenges is to acknowledge it. Now, unfortunately, some require the person to challenge or tackle the challenge head on with the mantra that that's just the way the world is. But this isn't a sort of thinking that's similar to that. I'm shouting this out to the world and want everyone to know what it is. But this more comes with a sort of self-reflection, a sort of self-acceptance that can help the person grow. Because there have been many times in my life too where I experienced this, where if I were to be in denial and not face a problem head on and just ignore it, there's a certain feeling at the back of your mind that's just, it doesn't go away, and you don't feel free until you acknowledge it or talk to somebody about it. And it's similar to that fashion. By doing so, you build strong character. And it's very similar to the 3 marks of existence, which are impermanence, dissatisfaction, and non-self. They work in a similar way to that. You understand this is how the world works, and while there be nothing you can do about it, there are many ways you can deal with it, and doing so can make you a very strong person. Now, besides acceptance, meditation has proven to be a very key characteristic in Buddhism that translates very well into the medical community. It is a way of dealing with the sort of emotional distress, so that can include anxiety, stress, depression, and many other mental issues that people may deal with. And this belief that meditation is only successful in the medical field isn't just heavily regarded in the religion of Buddhism, but it's also been proven in the world of medicine as well. I found in a medical article online while I was researching about this was that in Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, they found numerous studies where meditation has proven to have a result that can reduce small to moderate reductions of multiple negative dimensions. Basically, what that meant was that it can improve one's health, no matter how little or how small, is proven to be very, very helpful. And now, when it comes to meditation, it doesn't mean to meditate for multiple hours. It's proven that meditation, whether it be 5 minutes to 10 minutes to even an hour, can have some very great benefits. Even if one were to not have any sort of mental issues, it, like I said before, it provides a form of mental clarity. It gives you a self of awareness, which has become a very big topic or key topic that we've been talking about in today's video. Okay, so if you're following along with the presentation I provided in the discussion page, I linked the presentation because you will definitely not be able to see this monitor. I want to include this second quote, which is very, very relatable in terms of meditation, which is from Buddha, by the way. Is the mind is everything. What you think is what you become. Now, this sort of thinking can be very, very. You can work it into meditation more so. I don't know the right words for it, but this whole slide, the only reason I included it was because I myself have tried meditating. I found it to be very effective before. I woke up in the I woke up in the morning, and this would be one of the first things I would do, and it would definitely give me a sense of mental clarity. Because I said before, the reason why meditation is so effective is because it brings you to a state of tranquility or peace, and it's something that's just good, or I feel is good for your overall health. And the reason I did this in the morning was because if this is one of the first things I'm thinking about, I don't have to think about school or about what I'm going to eat or just anything else that's going on in my day, and I found it to be easiest to do this in the morning. So I just include some basic steps and how one can begin to meditate. This is very simple. It's not heavy. It's not heavily complex. It's not an advanced type of meditation. It's very basic. So for the first step, what you want to do is find a very comfortable place to take a seat. Now, once you take a seat, I want you to sit, obviously, most typically crisscrossed or cross-legged. Adjust your posture, more likely your back, so that you can be in a very comfortable position, because you'll be sitting down for, however long you want to do this. Maybe 15 minutes, 1 minute, 5 minutes, or however you see fit. While you're doing it, take awareness of your environment and begin to breathe very slowly but lightly. Now, when doing that, I'm doing it very carefully at least, you'll reach the fourth step. And this is where the meditation will actually take place. Once you're breathing and you just begin to think, thoughts will race into your mind. And the thoughts I want you to focus on, or at least what I found online, is to focus on the thoughts that take you away from breathing. So it's almost like daydreaming. When you're in chemistry class, you're just watching the professor or your teacher if you're in high school. You just thoughts that make you lose your sense of space or lose your sense of self. And those are the thoughts I want you to focus on. And after this, the meditation is essentially done. You can go much longer if you feel like you need to. But from meditating, what it does is that it's a very effective tool because it causes you to go into this very key characteristic of meditation, which is called mindfulness. Now, in Buddhism, mindfulness is the ability to hold a type of mental fixation on something, which is something you've done in meditation if you've ever done it before, or just from reading it you can tell, is to be able to keep your concentration or a thought on a particular object. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be inside, it can be outside, it can be anything. But as long as you're able to fix your conscious onto that object and ignore everything else, you're practicing a sense of mindfulness. And in doing so, once you forget that you're breathing and focusing on the thought, you reach a sense of one-pointedness, which is basically where the mind and the self dissolve and all you're thinking about is that one thought. Nothing else comes into mind. Now, while doing this is very relatable to the sense of when we were talking of mental health in the previous slide, where mindfulness helps dealing with acceptance. It comes with you learn a sense of clear comprehension, which is like figuring out the way the world is. And this is a common theme of Buddhism, just accepting the way the world is and just identifying things for how it is, not why they are, but just how they are, and acknowledging what is actually in front of you. Oh, hi, this is Edward again, and I'm going to be talking about Buddhism and in relations to their diets. So, the idea behind Buddhist diet is they're usually vegetarians, but sometimes they tend to eat meat at the same time, but most Buddhists tend to be vegetarians. So the reason why they choose to be a vegetarian is it kind of follows the first precept. Yeah. The first precept, and the first precept is that you shouldn't harm any living beings. So following that first precept is not hurting or killing any animals. That's why they tend to follow the rule of being vegetarian. But in some cases where they don't have enough substance to have that kind of diet, they have to follow the rule of eating meat. So in order for them to eat meat, because it's considered to be bad karma, because harming an animal, it breaks the first precept, they just kill the animal and they do good karma to negate the bad karma. So an example would be when they kill the fish, for example, when they're hunting for fish, that's considered bad karma. And in order to negate that, they would maybe give out the food to other people to generate good karma to like outweigh it. And another thing that Buddhists can do as a diet is not consume any alcoholic beverages. The reason they're not allowed to consume alcoholic beverages is because, first of all, it's also the fifth precept in the rules, like the fifth one. And when they use or take consumption of alcohol, their minds become less clear and foggy. So in order for them to have a clear mind and follow the path to enlightenment, they need to make sure they don't consume any alcohol so they have a clear mind to reach that main goal of enlightenment / or nirvana. Before we go to the next part of this presentation, I also forgot to mention that Buddhists tend to view food more as a necessity rather than a pleasure. So they do this because in order to reach that end goal of nirvana, they need to make sure they have no attachments, or else they'll end up in one of the bad parts of afterlife. Now, the last topic I would like to discuss is Buddhists' views on abortion. So abortion is a very big topic, just not in general, not even just in Buddhism, but the idea behind abortion, the ideology for Buddhists on abortion is that it kind of depends, but a majority of them believe that it's on circumstances. So one of the reasons why there's a camp, so one camp is they believe that abortion is wrong, just straight up wrong, and the other group is it's okay, but it has to be a right circumstance for it to be okay. So the first camp says no, because abortion is killing a human being, which also violates the first precept of the thing I mentioned earlier. It violates that because it says to harm no living beings, and by doing abortion, you're gonna kill a child that's going to be born soon. So that totally violates it. The other camp talks about it's okay in certain cases because, for example, a great example would be abortion's good, and when it comes to if it harms the mother, if the baby becomes born. So let's say if the baby had to be born, the mom would lose her life. In some cases, that would be okay. And another example would be like if the baby comes out and it's going to have some like mental or physiological issues, then that's also another case where abortion is also valid. Well, the thing about abortion in Buddhism is that there's this big divide, and it just varies very a lot. And even the Dalai Lama himself says that as well. And he states that of course abortion from a Buddhist viewpoint is an act of killing and is negative in generally speaking. But it depends on the circumstances. He then also states that I think abortion should be approved or disapproved according to each circumstance. Okay, so majority of the presentation is done now. I just want to provide it sort of conclusion side. We know it's empty on the thing if you're following along, but it's just more so to provide our thoughts or my thoughts of the presentation, Edward's thoughts of the presentation, any questions or sort of discussion we may have together. Now, my thoughts are towards this presentation or from Buddhism towards health in general is that it varies. It's like you can attest to this that it strongly follows the 5 precepts. And now, as we know, like these aren't necessarily 10 commandments that you have to live or die by, but they're very strong or ethical moral principles that a Buddhism has to hold to be able to live a very healthy, sound life. And just from like going through the whole slides and presentation, Buddhism is very strong towards, I wouldn't say pro-life, but they're very like they want to promote a good sense of physical health as well as mental health. So anything that can benefit the well-being of not just human beings, but when talking about diets, even the animals or babies that haven't been born yet, they promote just a sense of life in general. And I think that's a very, very interesting and cool part of this presentation that I figured out about. For me, the conclusion that I have about Buddhist approach / views on healthcare in general is that, like what we he stated earlier, it's heavily based off those 5 rules that we mentioned earlier, because those 5 rules basically dictate everybody's approach towards healthcare. So, like I mentioned on diet or abortion, or in general, just when we talked about adultery and anger, you shouldn't like harm anybody, because that's the first precept. And like I feel like all the precepts could apply to everything we just like discussed in this presentation. Yeah, and what's crazy to think is that like mental health or everything in this presentation that we talk about, not even just the 5 precepts, but mental health, physical state, the 5 precepts, they're all sort of intertwined together. And like not just when I stated that the physical body and mental health are codependent of each other, much of everything we talked about is interrelated and codependent on each other in one way or another, which is a very interesting thing to think about, where it's sort of this type of balance that you can also see in type of a karmic balance where everything is just level, and just by being level, a sense of like normalcy that one is in its best mental state and well-being. Okay, so the last part of this is we're just going to talk about any questions we've had for each other, because each part we presented that we did the research ourselves separately, so we may have questions for another. Do you have anything questions for my part of the presentation? I just want your opinions on those 5 rules that we mentioned earlier, like those 5 main rules that are very
important to the views of this healthcare?
To me, the 5 precepts were very, very interesting. Now, I don't say this openly, but I am Catholic. I don't hold myself very strong to the 10 Commandments because I feel that this may be controversial or like just not very well received. But some of them I feel like are outdated. But there are definitely some parts of there that I do like to live by. But I don't myself hold them to a sort of life or death standard that other people may hold themselves to. But yeah, the 5 precepts are very interesting. I think there's some things that, because in Buddhism it's not very, the stigma around it isn't very strong as it is in 10 Commandments. Because in 10 Commandments, let's say if you were to break one of them, you could potentially be condemned to hell. But for this, it's more of they serve as a self-reflection, because as what I spoke about, where if you break one, it isn't end all be all, right? When you break one, rather, it's more of a self-reflection. So if I drank alcohol, I need to reevaluate myself, my actions, and how can I prevent myself from ever doing it again? Because at the end of this whole cycle, when it does eventually end, is when a person reaches spiritual enlightenment and eventually reaches nirvana, and that's the whole goal. So you want to avoid any type of karmic unbalance, and you try to accumulate as much positive or good karma, I can say, as possible. It's definitely an interesting thing, and even though I myself am not Buddhist, I would like to hold to myself to a couple of those standards, and I think it'll be very good for it's good for me as a person. A question I actually had for you was, in terms of when you were talking about diet, when they said that people opt for vegetarianism or even veganism because they don't want to take a life. Now, I could see where this applied to like many years ago, where what you hunted, your game, is essentially what you were going to eat for lunch, dinner, or breakfast. But now we live in a society where everything we get or can get, should you choose to live that lifestyle in like a type of urban or suburban area, is you can go to your local supermarket, to your local fast food restaurant, you get your TV dinner, and just eat. You'll never have to, ever in your life, have to kill a squirrel, a cow, a horse, or anything, whatever you choose to eat. This attitude can be found in vegetarians or even Buddhists as well. But I just want to know what you think about Buddhists that still choose to be vegan even though they themselves don't have to actually kill an animal.
I feel like they still choose this way because I feel like some of them are just cookie cutter and want to follow this just straight up, just to reach that path to enlightenment quicker, to reach that end goal of nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
And like what you stated, since like everything is basically handed to us, I can see how people are like, yeah, I can eat meat now, because in the 5 Roses that says no harming, basically I feel like that applies to yourself. So since you're technically not the one harming / killing the animals that you're consuming, you feel like you're not technically breaking those rules and gaining any negative karma. So I feel like that could be a good thing. And also the fact that when you buy it, I can see how it's kind of good karma, because you're actually helping people get like some kind of income, which kind of could counterbalance it, because you're generating that positive good karma.
I want to know your attitudes. Sorry to touch on this again, but don't you think, like, the way I approach the 10 Commandments, right, because I believe that some of them, as controversial as they may be, or actually common, but some of them may be outdated, and this same rule could be applied to the 5 precepts, right?
Yeah.
Where, like, not harming, you can't harm another living being, whether that be a person, an animal, or anything that's just living in general. And don't you think that some Buddhists may actually evolve or change this precept into thinking that even though they don't have to hurt another living being, they just don't want any type of living beings to be hurt in general, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's good to know. Okay, so these are 2 citation slides. We actually had 2. We had a couple of sources. Majority of them were found on the internet. We had, I believe, 1 or 2 scholarly articles. Other of them were actual articles online. that we use to get, you know, to find the type of point of views about Buddhism in general towards medicine. And we actually did, of course, use the illustrated guide of Buddhism. Not more so of, we didn't use it to find any attitudes towards like medicine, although there was actually a part of it. I believe if I read more I would have found some, but we used it more to find like the basics of Buddhism, so like anything about meditation or that. Anyway, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Paulo Abelar, and
I'm Edward Abelar.
thanks for watching.